The Last Will, The Price of Loyalty. Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles. In this story, no one was entirely honest, because the truth always hides in the hands that look the most innocent. A courtroom in Los Angeles was about to teach you pity for a woman, only to rip that pity away and hurl it back in your face. Justice here was not a line, it was a shadow that never stopped moving. As Maria Gutierrez sat in the witness stand, everyone in the room saw her the same way, a tired, fragile, innocent woman. Her hands trembled, but that tremor seemed to carry the weight of 3 years of devotion, not the weight of guilt. The audience and the court did not yet know that this first impression was merely the curtain drawn in front of a carefully built stage. She spoke of Margaret Whitfield's final 3 years, the midnight medication schedules, the mornings they watched the first light break through the window together, the hours spent in cold plastic hospital chairs. Every sentence softened the hearts in that room a little further. But the narrator knew, and now, so should you, that this softening was only the first step of the fall. Richard Whitfield's fury could be read in his hand before it ever reached his voice. He gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles had gone white, the veins beneath his skin rising like a river. "My mother wasn't sick, she was deceived," he whispered, and everyone in the room sensed the desperation beneath his anger, but no one dared to pity him for it. In Judge Harrison's spectacles, the cold reflection of the ceiling lights rippled, as though her eyes had become 2 pieces of glass, stripped entirely of feeling. When her gavel came down, the sound was less a warning than an incision. In this room, there was no place for anger, only for evidence. As Maria's hands trembled faintly against the wood of the stand, the spotlight above cast that tremor across the surface like a shadow play, small, skittish movements, as if an unseen confession lived at her fingertips. The room read that shadow as innocence. But shadows, depending on where the light falls, can lie just as easily as they can reveal. Plaintiff's counsel asked a question that seemed ordinary enough. When had Maria first gained access to Margaret's bank accounts? The answer was delayed, only a second, but that second cracked the room's first fault line. Not 36 months, 42, 6 months more. 6 months no one had known about. Cross-examination was no longer a conversation. It was a fistfight, blow for blow. Defense counsel threw a question. Maria answered with a block. The next question came lower, landing like a strike to the gut. 42 months, or 36, Miss Gutierrez. The room searched her face for the bruise that verbal punch must have left. Maria's answer came late, her voice cracking. "It was a mistake," she said. The accountant had confused the records, but the air in the room now carried the scent of suspicion, and once that scent begins to settle, it does not easily lift. And it was there, precisely there, that the audience's conscience staggered for the first time. The woman you pitied only moments ago now stood at the edge of a lie. Loyalty, or a ledger, a heart, or a balance sheet. Beneath the cold light of the courtroom, the two now shared the very same shadow. Defense counsel set a document on the stand, a printout of bank records. In the 42nd month, small but regular transfers had begun from Margaret's account into one opened under Maria's own name. Amounts small enough to avoid notice, but their regularity spoke less of coincidence than of habit. Maria's face went white. She said the transfers had been Margaret's own wish, small gifts given freely, but the tremor in her voice was no longer the tremor of devotion. It was the tremor of being caught. The same eyes that had pitied her only minutes before now weighed her in an entirely different light. Judge Harrison examined the document in silence. Every soul in that room was asking the same question in the privacy of their own conscience. Was this the price of loyalty, or the final act of a plan patiently woven over years? The answer, for now, belonged to no one. When Margaret's longtime accountant took the stand, he carried a stack of signed gift declaration forms. For every single transfer, there existed a letter of gift in Margaret's own handwriting, legally flawless, properly declared for tax purposes, carrying no trace of concealment. The room, which had held its breath, exhaled once more. But it was not that simple. The accountant pointed to a pattern worth noting. The size of the gifts grew larger in every period when the family's visits grew sparser, as though Margaret filled the absence of her sons with every dollar she gave to Maria. It was not a crime, but it looked like a scar, and whose hand had opened that scar remained unclear. Just as the room swayed within that half-relief, the rear door opened quietly. A family physician of 30 years stepped in, holding a faded envelope. The clerk whispered to the judge, and for a fleeting instant, the cold, distant reflection in Judge Harrison's spectacles warmed with genuine curiosity. The envelope in the doctor's hand held a letter Margaret had written only 1 week before her death, one she had said should be opened only if necessary. The defense objected at once. Hearsay, they argued. Plaintiff's counsel countered that it qualified as a dying declaration. Judge Harrison's ruling was brief. Objection overruled. As the doctor lifted his glasses to his eyes, the room fell so silent a pin drop could have been heard. Margaret's own words began to spill from the doctor's voice, that she loved her sons, but they had never once held her hand, that Maria had been there every single night. That house, Margaret had written, had been earned not with money, but with loyalty. And it was there that the audience's conscience staggered for a second time, but now in the opposite direction. The woman you suspected only moments ago now stood as the guardian of a dying woman's final wish. This time, the shadow play had revealed the true source of the light. Maria's hands still trembled, but no longer from guilt, only from the weight she carried. But the story would not end there. A woman rose from the back row of the gallery. Richard's sister, Eleanor, who had not spoken a single word until now. Her voice trembled, but the resolve in her eyes silenced every tremor. Eleanor recounted how her brother had secretly hired an appraiser for their mother's house, that he had gone not to see her, but to price the property. Richard's face drained of color. The same fist that had struck the table now trembled helplessly upon his knee. The room dissolved into murmurs. The judge's gavel came down, but no longer to restore order, because the truth had already established its own. Beneath 40 years of anger lay nothing more than debt and greed. Judge Harrison drew the files before her. The room was now filled not with anger, nor with suspicion, but with a silent expectancy. The scale had swung from one side to the other since the very first moment of this trial, from innocence to doubt, from doubt back to innocence. Only one swing remained. The law evaluated the validity of a will through testamentary capacity and the absence of undue influence. But this court, in this case, had seen something beyond the law, the resolve of a woman to reward the one loyal hand she found in the absence of her own children. As the judge opened her mouth to read the verdict, every breath in the room stopped. But at that very instant, the court clerk's phone rang, and an officer stepped in bearing news no one had expected. The officer leaned toward the judge and spoke in a low voice. The room fixed on Judge Harrison's face, as if trying to read the whispered words themselves. Her jaw tightened for a moment. Then, with her usual cold control, she turned back to the room. The appraiser Richard had hired had reached the court with a signed statement. Richard had received an offer to sell the house 6 months earlier and had concealed it from both his mother and his sister. This was no longer a supposition. It was a fact, written, signed, dated. Richard's attorney rose to say something, but no words came, because there was nothing left to defend, only the remnants of a man's attempt to turn his mother's death into an opportunity. When plaintiff's counsel, yes, now standing on Maria's side, began her closing argument, her voice was not a battle cry, but the calm delivery of a truth. No court could strip a woman of her right to put into writing her gratitude toward the one person who remained by her side when no family did. Defense counsel kept his closing brief. What he defended now was no longer a claim, but merely a man's dignity, and that dignity had already slipped from his hands. This court, he said, was not built to judge human weakness, but the room heard even that final sentence as a kind of confession. Judge Harrison drew the file before her and removed her glasses, as though she no longer needed the coldness of glass. "This court," she said, "has presided over countless inheritance disputes over the years, but rarely have I watched a scale shift direction so many times. In light of the submitted medical records, the witness testimony, and the deceased's own handwritten final words, this court finds that Margaret Whitfield's will was executed with full mental capacity, free of any undue influence. The will stands. This court rules in favor of the defendant." The gavel came down. The sound announced not the end of a war, but merely the moment a truth had finally settled into place. The law had won. The system had functioned exactly as it was designed to. Evidence weighed, witnesses heard, a ruling delivered. Yet no face in that room carried the look of triumph, because this was a victory that would not restore a 40-year family. Richard did not look at Maria once as he left the room. Eleanor walked out behind her brother, but never close enough to catch him, the distance between them now too wide for any court ruling to close. And Maria, her fingers still trembling, carried not the keys to the house she had won, but the weight of the 3 years she had lost. Justice in this room had found its place according to the letter of the law, but conscience still sat in an empty chair, questioning how cheaply or how dearly 40 years of love could be sold with a single signature. Because sometimes the system functions perfectly, and still no one wins. The 3 people who walked out of that cold Los Angeles courtroom would go on living with 3 different losses. And you who have listened to this story, must now ask your own conscience, what was the price of loyalty? And who, in truth, was the one who paid it?